I agree with you that, yeah, people run from pain faster than they run towards pleasure.
And
definitely. Darryl Bright, welcome to the podcast, you beautiful bastard. Have a look at this hair on you.
What do you reckon, mate?
Mate,
Get a nice wee filter on this thing. I appreciate it, man.
That thing is manicured to within an inch of its life. That looks like the MCG on grand final day.
Mate, I think very highly of you, mate, so I thought I'd make an effort for a change.
Anyway, mate, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, mate. It's been a long time since we caught up, and I'm glad this is a good excuse for it.
Yeah, been a really long time. So for the listeners, Darryl Bright, or Irish as he's known.
Lee, aka Leroy, I hear.
So Darryl and I used to work together when I first got into the property industry. So I was working in investments. I was based down in Melbourne and he was based up here. And then since then, you've gone on to Coloshe.
That's right.
What are you doing there?
So I'm a real estate agent. I started off as an associate 2 years ago and worked my way through the ranks over the last sort of 18 months. And in the last sort of 6 to 12 months, I've become a real estate agent. And we specialize in high-end property, quality over quantity, delivering a high level of service for sort of the more affluent clients here on the Gold Coast.
Yeah. Affluent, loaded clients. I've seen some of those houses you're selling. They're unbelievable.
Mate, coming from a council estate in Belfast in Northern Ireland, it's definitely a culture shock, but I feel very lucky.
Yeah. So, yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about your journey to get here, and then, obviously we'll get into the real estate stuff at some point. Yeah. So you're from Belfast.
From Belfast.
Is that an IRA stronghold? Am I remembering
that?
No,
it's I would say the opposite at the moment. It's the British side of Ireland. So,
okay.
Long story short, the partition of Ireland happened in 1921. At that point, Britain occupied Northern Ireland. So it essentially became Northern Ireland in 1921, which was the British side of Ireland. Yeah. So the opposite of the IRA.
As I understand it, the Britain or the UK took over Ireland, and then there was a war, and they essentially agreed to give all of it back except for Northern Ireland. And that's what there's been. I mean, when I was growing up, there was a whole heap of violence over there. What I never understood though is why didn't Britain just give that bit back? Why did they want to keep a little bit of it?
I'm probably going to butcher it. I don't know the full history of it. My uncle, he's actually the advisor for the Secretary of State in Northern Ireland, and his job is to sit down with leading sort of IRA figures, UVF, the British and the Irish politicians. And it's all about progressiveness in Northern Ireland, because the reality is, I guess there's two sides of it. There's cultural aspects that people have an issue with the fact that Northern Ireland is, they would say, rightfully Ireland and it should be given back. But then there's also financial aspects that it's better for the country because Britain is connected with Ireland. So there's two sides of it. But yeah, it happened in 1921. It became Northern Ireland. It was brewing for a while, but the Troubles, as you would call it, which is sort of the most recent issues, happened in 1969, and that's essentially when there was a full war zone happening. That was before my time, but my parents and grandparents grew up basically in civil war, essentially in Belfast, and it was it's interesting because growing up, my parents were always of the opinion, like, live and let live. If somebody's nice to you, be nice to them. Yeah. But I mean, driving here today, I think about this more the more I talk, obviously, with people like yourself, reflecting on how I grew up, because it was normal. But now living in Australia, it feels so abnormal. Yeah. As an example, I live in Mermaid Beach, coming to Southport. In Belfast, there's very distinct British parts and very distinct Irish parts, mostly divided by suburbs. So I would have had to, coming from Mermaid Beach, I would have had to drive, let's just say, Broadbeach and Surfers. I'm in the British side. Broadbeach and Surfers are Catholic. Yeah. I would have subconsciously just driven around it to get here. Yeah. And not that there would ever be any issues, because I grew up after it, but it was always just part of the culture that you just sort of stay in your own suburb. You don't really mingle just because of the history. And coming here now and seeing how, I guess, free everyone is, and you don't even think about where you can and can't go. But yeah, that was very present when I grew up.
Yeah, it was the thing that struck me when I went to Europe is, in Australia, everything is so far apart. Like I'm from Melbourne originally, and there's quite a distinct difference between Melbourne people and Queensland people. Queensland people are quite nice. Melbourne people are quite, No, Melbourne.
Okay, you got to be careful.
But, you know, it's like 2,000 kilometers away, where when you're in Europe, like, you literally go 100 kilometers and you're in a totally different country, different everything, different culture, different language. It just blows your mind how close it all is, yet how different it all is. And I often think about, you know, the passage of time, like with enough time, things kind of get embedded into the culture where it does become like a completely different place. But that's gnarly that you would avoid suburbs when you were driving.
Yeah, it'd be something you definitely think about.
Yeah.
And I guess it's funny because people always say it must have been tough, and the reality is there were certain instances that would happen when you're younger, but it was never. People talk about the religious divide, but it was never anything to do with religion.
Yeah.
It was very much to do with your parents would say, he's a Catholic, don't talk to him, or he's a Protestant, don't talk to him. And as a kid, you just accept that that's the way life is, and you just do that. But nobody could tell the difference between a Protestant or a Catholic. So anyway, that's the way I grew up. But other than that, I would say Belfast is one of the most beautiful places in the world. Very friendly, good, strong, hardworking people. Growing up tough, and I think a certain element, and I think we'll speak about this today, a certain element of greatness or goodness and strength comes from a tough upbringing. And I think you're a testament to that as well, seeing how obviously we've shared stories. I'm sure we'll talk about it later on in this podcast, but I think to be happy in life, I think you do need to go through some sort of conflict or toughness to sort of figure things out. So
yeah, it's almost like the unfortunate barrier to entry. I think this is true. It's definitely my experience, and I've seen it in the world, or in my version of the world, the unfortunate barrier to entry to success is quite a bit of pain to begin with. And you know, I get a little bit philosophical about these things, but I often think back and it's like, if you had your time over, would you pick to have some sort of brilliant life where you're amazing at something, but in order to do that, you have to go through some unimaginable pain in order to get there? Or would you choose a mediocre is the wrong word because it quiet? Would you choose a quiet life where everything sort of stays in a nice, safe band? And when I personally think back through, you know, some of the hardships that I went through, you know, growing up and trying to get to wherever the hell it is I'm going. When I think back to those hardships, I'm like, no way. Like, people talk back to their teenage years and how they'd love to do it again. I'm like, absolutely not. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, let alone myself again. So when I think about the bad times, it's like, no way. But then when I think about some of the more unusual things that I've been able to do as a result of the grit and determination, and I'm certainly not putting myself on any sort of pedestal, but
I think you should. I think you should do what you've done, mate. I think you deserve it. I know you're modest, but I think from my perspective, the outside perspective, I'll say you deserve it.
You're making me blush. Anyway, but like you look at, so for example, the stint that I had, you know, doing pro triathlon, like I love that. It was some of the best stuff in the world. So, you know, if I was able to start again, I actually think I would choose a life of highs and lows.
Yeah.
There was this guy, so I think Ash Gentle. So Ash Gentle is a very successful triathlete. She's actually based out of Brisbane, her and her husband now, Josh. But Ash has had a really good career. Pretty sure she's been to the Olympics. She's gone to long course triathlon now. Does really well. A little bit of a darling of the triathlon world. Like, a lot of people love it. Anyway, that's sort of basic bit of background. Anyway, she... I'm pretty sure I've got the right athlete here. So she has a race which is absolutely horrible, and a lot of athlete life is about self-promotion. So, you know, if it's not on the gram, did it actually happen? And she puts this post up, and it's a post where you know, anyone can sort of look at it and identify with the pain, but, you know, it's the athletes who have been through it who can really identify with it, you know, where you work at something for 6 months and then it just doesn't come together on the day and it's like your whole world is falling apart. And this athlete in Germany, I think it was Sebastian Kienle anyway, the names are kind of irrelevant. He responds in a comment to a post where she's clearly gutted and in a mentally in a really bad way, and he says he relates back to some of his similar experiences, and he says, you know, I often in times like this I remind myself that I choose a life of highs and lows. I don't have to do this, but by doing it I get to have highs that few people on earth ever experience. But the price I've got to pay for those highs is I must experience the lows. So I choose this life. God, I get goosebumps. You see that? Literal goosebumps. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know how we got off on this tangent, talking about hard times. Hard times can make quite resilient, strong people.
Yeah. And speaking of hard times, mate, obviously I look at you, successful business owner and a very successful Ironman in their own right, one of the best in the world. And to say something, it's such a, I would consider triathletes, let alone Ironmen, to be one of the toughest, some of the toughest people that have ever lived. And to do that when you weren't always in that space, I mean, because you look at these people and you just assume that they were always fit, they were always strong, they were doing it from no age. But once upon a time, Leigh wasn't as fit as he currently is. So I just wanted to know was there anything that happened necessarily in your life to sort of flick the switch from working at Custodian, where we were, not fit, not in shape, to start sort of going down that road? Was there like a flick that switched in your head? A switch that flicked in your head, should I say?
So I had a hard time growing up. And without going into the details of it, it was just rough. And from maybe 13, 14, 15 years old through till when I was about 30, I really had a very difficult time coming to terms with just some horrible stuff. And, you know, I got to 30 years old. I was just about to turn 31, and I got a brief moment of clarity where I saw myself, not for the stories that I told, you know, like I was, when I was a kid, if I had $1 for every time someone said Leigh has so much potential if he would just apply himself. And, you know, I lived that story. Like, I believed that, you know, I was brilliant if just. But if just was never coming.
No.
And, you know, at 30 years old, I just had not an out-of-body experience, but just like a thing where I could see myself for where I was and for who I was, not who I could potentially be.
You were finally present.
Yeah, and I didn't like what I saw. In fact, I hated what I saw. And, you know, I believe that we all get moments in life, and we don't get many of them, but you get a moment where there's this window where you can change. And most people, I think, ignore it. They just get busy in the busyness of day-to-day life or whatever it is they normally do. And I was very lucky. I also worked very hard, but I was very lucky that I had that moment, and I had that moment at a time when I was motivated to change. And I spent years, I'm still doing it. I spent years forgetting all of the rubbish that like all of the terrible internal dialogue that I'd had. And I had to put my life back together. And I had to put it back together from the very basics. Like basics, like I had no friends left at 30 because I was a dickhead. No one wanted to hang around with me. So I had to rebuild it up from the basics of like personal, it started off at self-management, and then personal interactions, and then work. And work is kind of where you first met me, where I was putting work back together. And then it layered in, right? So I would do one thing, which would then give me the confidence to do another thing, and it built and built and built. And where you caught me was when I was starting to get into fitness, and some people were doing a triathlon, and I was just a buffet. I'm like, I can fucking do that.
Yeah.
And I went and did it, and I thought that was something that was lost to me. I did it when I was a little kid, like 11, 12 years old, and I thought it was gone. And I just got back and I got the bug for it. And then, as I do with everything in my life, like it's either, I'm 0 or 100.
Yeah.
There's no in the middle. And that's what I did with triathlon, and went, from like overweight and not fit to pro triathlon in 2.5 years. I mean, I was old by athlete standards when I got into it, and then had a couple of years on the pro circuit. And look, I probably got the most out of myself that I could have at the age I was at. Yeah. Anyway, I forgot. Here, I'm supposed to be interviewing you. What's happening
we're
here?
having a conversation. That's fine, mate. That's fine. But it's interesting how the thing that I picked out of that, obviously among a lot of things, was the moment your life changed was the moment you were willing to be honest with yourself for the first time in a while, and like actually feel. Because I've gone through moments like that where it's all right feeling like a loser when you are a loser, but try feeling like a loser. But yeah, just I think that's important for anyone listening that's, I guess, struggling, and not that we're experts, but going through it. I think experience teaches, and being willing to be honest with yourself is, I think, something that a lot of people try and avoid, because like you've said, when you're really honest with yourself and you look yourself in the mirror, not a lot of people, or some people, don't really like what they see. Yeah. But I think that's the first step to actually making a change, is just trying to finally be honest with yourself, and then at least it gives you the ability to do something about it.
Carry on.
Yeah, because I've spent years, even around the time when we first met, I think part of your 20s and growing up mid-20s and moving country, I think a lot of it you don't realize at the time, but looking back, a lot of it was just figuring out what this was all about. And I don't think it'll never stop. But
why did you move? It's a long way to go. Like, it's literally the other side of the world.
It was all a big accident, really. So it almost fell into place by itself. But so I was whenever I was growing up, so just sort of talking about Belfast, I grew up, mum and dad, we grew up in a council estate in East Belfast. I have a younger brother, younger sister.
So a council estate is like commission housing here?
Yeah, so it was owned by the council or housing commission, and we rented off them because of, I guess, working class families. It's interesting. In Belfast, it's actually very big. Basically, developers that are owned by the government, essentially. I forget what it's called, but they would just buy sites, build them, and they just give them to low income families, and just rent them at a lower rate. So housing commission. Yeah,
was it? So housing. When I think of housing commission here, my mind immediately goes to these housing projects. They're called commission flats in Melbourne, where they're these big, huge, ugly eyesores that were built in super locations all over Melbourne. And the idea was obviously to give people in need housing, but they have, I mean, there's a lot of crime and drugs and whatnot in there. Like, I wouldn't be confident walking through the grounds of those at night time.
Not the same.
It's not the same?
It's not the same, no. So I think it's just an interesting financial difference, because in Australia, you've got big disparities. Like we see, you've got the tour racks, and then you've got the housing commissions sort of within, say, 10, 15 kilometres, whatever it is, in, say, Melbourne. But in Belfast, like, from my experience, no one's really doing really well. Like, it's almost just everyone, at least that I knew, was all working class. Everyone lived in housing commission houses. It was all terrace housing. But from my experience, my parents grew up, my mum was a stay-at-home full-time mum. My dad, he was a ceiling fixer, so he worked on building sites. And I was aware that we never had a lot of money, but I couldn't even count on two hands the amount of times my parents complained in their life.
You're a kid, right? Like, money's arbitrary, and I think most things that children want until they're 15, like, all they want is your time.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like money's meaningless.
Yeah.
But that your parents didn't complain about it
Never complained.
Well, it means it's not an issue, is it?
Yeah, and that's right. And that's
Yeah.
right. So growing up, like I look, cause it's funny whenever, because we've got a 4-year-old son now, and I was speaking to Leigh before we jumped on the podcast. Normally we set the phone outside, but I spent all of yesterday in the hospital, so it's good and bad. My partner's 35 weeks pregnant, and she started.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Did you not know?
I don't think so.
Yeah, there we go.
Or if I did know, I've forgotten.
Yeah, that's all right.
Now I seem like a real dick.
Sorry, we can cut this one out. So yeah, she's 35 weeks in 3 days. So she started getting contractions yesterday morning. So
Oh, wow.
I've just got to keep my phone close to me just in case.
This might be cut
If
short
it
because we're
rings,
having a baby.
and we're in Southport, so we're close by. So
Yeah. Our priorities, mate. We got to wrap this up first.
yeah. But yeah. So got a 4-year-old son and got a baby girl due on the 1st of June. But
Amazing.
Any time between now and then. But it's interesting, as you have kids, you start to, as they say, as you get older, you start to respect people, and especially my parents in particular, just how they did it. Like my mum had me when she was 17.
Wow.
She had my brother when she was like 21, 22, and had my sister when she was 23, 24. So she had 3 kids under the age of, say 24. Had 3 kids, and I look at that now and I think, how did they do it? One income, my dad was struggling, and everyone was sort of. I was aware that it was tough, but like I said, I've always loved my parents, and they've given me everything in life. They basically sacrificed their life for us. But just when you become a parent, you realize how tough it must have been. And on top of that, realizing that they still never complained about anything. They just got up, got on with it, didn't moan, just this is the way it is, and we'll do what we have to do. So, yeah, it's beautiful. Just now starting to think about how they're built, and it's very inspiring for me. But yeah, the story of Belfast.
No, I'm with you. I was thinking about the commission housing. So, the reason I'm asking about this, and I'm going to ask you a few more questions about the council housing, but the background to why it interests me is obviously there's a housing crisis at the moment, and the housing crisis is driven by too many people, not enough houses, and any idea that's put out to fix it that doesn't involve more houses has to fail.
Yeah.
Because there's just the fundamental is too many people, not enough houses. So we need more houses, unless we're going to kick people out, which anyway, we need more houses is the point that I'm getting at. One of the proposals that's been put forward is that the government should build a whole heap of housing. Where I immediately go to in my head when I hear that is I go to the commission flats in Melbourne, and I'm like, who would want to live in those? You know what I mean? It doesn't. If I had an option, I would rather own my own house. But I think it's really interesting to hear that when you were growing up in Belfast, it wasn't like that. And perhaps there's government housing. I haven't lived in government housing. Perhaps there's government housing in Australia which isn't like that as well, that I'm just not aware of. But super interesting to hear that was just sort of the way of life. And
it's normal.
Yeah. And it's a big thing in Belfast, is it? Government housing?
Massive. Because I think because of the economic issues in Belfast and Northern Ireland, it was commonplace. Where it actually began. So I read this book recently. My uncle, which I referenced earlier, gave me was a book about the Troubles, and it's called Making Sense of the Troubles, which is essentially the most comprehensive book if you want to understand what's happened in Northern Ireland over the last sort of 100 years. And where this might not be appropriate, but I'll just explain it. We'll talk about it. So where the original push for housing came in was whenever the partition of Ireland happened, Northern Ireland happened, they realised that everyone that had a house had a vote, right? So the governments realised that if they control the housing, they control the votes, right? So therefore they were like, well, if we want to get more votes, we just need to get more of the people that we want to vote for us in the houses. So therefore we're going to give the British majority the houses. They're going to have the votes, and they're going to vote for us to keep us in power. And that's where it began.
Yeah, right.
So, interesting. Reading that book, looking at that, looking back, you see a very clear distinction between sort of the the east side of Belfast, which is more British, and the west side of Belfast, which is more Irish, and it starts to make sense that say they were pushed to one side, which is a shame, but that was where it originated from. But I guess at this point, people have, I guess there's a systemic problem in Northern Ireland that I realized whenever I went back, that there is such a reliance on the government, and there's such a reliance on government support that I think it actually hurts the system.
How?
So put yourself in a single mum's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
She gets support from the government, an allowance every week.
Mm-hmm.
She'll get a house paid for, she'll get a car, she'll get support, and then she'll get like $50 or $100 a week as spending money, right? So everything's paid for and she'll get some allowance, right? Now, if she went out and worked 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, she'll pay for the house, pay for everything, pay for whatever else, and she'll have $150 left over.
Yeah,
right?
so what's the incentive?
What's the incentive? So I see that as a big systemic issue that I don't know who's right and who's wrong. I know from my perspective, I wouldn't want to rely on anyone, but and you'd be the same, that you want to make something of yourself. But when there is that much support to the point that there's almost no incentive to go out and work and to produce, that creates an issue in my eyes.
Well, this is like you hear the Americans arguing about the universal basic income. And I often think Americans take it a little bit too far. To be honest, I think in Australia we have largely got a lot of the social safety nets right, although there's a couple of cracks starting to show now where no one's going to starve. But if you want to do well, you've got to put in some effort. Where I think and in fairness to America, like I was only there when I was a kid. But in America, the way they certainly portray it in their media is it's too much like you either work or you starve. Like it's. Yeah. Where you're saying in Belfast, it's almost too far the other way, where it's like we will give you so much money that there's no real incentive to work.
Yeah, and it's hard because then I don't know the system well enough to be able to assess it or solve the problems, but it definitely looks that way as far as, is it economically viable to pull that safety net away, and then what would happen in that place, the jobs, because that's such a genuine issue because of the 40, 50 years of violence. There's been a lot of issues with trying to get businesses to invest in Northern Ireland because of that. Now things are changing. Ireland's a bit different, but in Northern Ireland it had been an issue. So,
well, Ireland's made itself a tax haven.
Haven.
Yeah, so you've got, like, you buy stuff on Facebook and you see it's like Facebook Island, and it's because they've got this ridiculously low tax rate. So, please don't sue me, Facebook. No. But my understanding is a lot of these major companies, internet companies, they're making their money all over the world, but they're channeling it through Ireland. Therefore, they're paying bugger all tax in the place where they're actually making the money. Yeah,
I read recently that I think Ireland is one of, if not the richest country. Like Ireland is one of, if not the richest countries in the world from a GDP perspective per capita.
Yeah,
but is that true? Because does the money stay there?
Exactly. I was about to say that. Yeah. Paper millions that don't actually exist. Yeah.
So my story, just going back to sort of how I came to Australia, was grew up in Belfast, and my parents always said, you either get yourself into sport or you get yourself into trouble. So, and that was I was speaking to a friend the other day, and it was very prevalent that I noticed that the kids that were involved in sport were sort of disciplined, sort of more focused, less distractions. They had to go to bed early on a Friday night, had a game on a Saturday morning, and they just had something. There was a sacrifice, right? And there was a focus, and there was, I want to beat this person, I want to beat this team, and as a result, I'm going to eat a bit better and whatever else. So I think just being a parent as well, you start to realize there is some consistency with discipline and sport.
Definitely, particularly with, sorry to interject, but particularly with young boys, right? So boys have energy. Like they just have energy, and it's got to be burnt. And you can't, armchair quarterbacking because I don't have kids, but I was a kid.
That's right. You're qualified.
But you can't tell a young boy, just to sit still.
No.
Like, you can't. You've got to channel that energy. And if you channel it in the right way, and I'm with you. So I'm with you with sport. So you've got the competitive spirit. You also get to burn out all the energy. But it teaches you these skills that as a man, I mean, as a person, but, you know, I'm a man, so that's the only reference point I've got. Yeah. They're skills that you've got to have, like where you delay gratification, where you're thinking long term, where you're able to turn up. It doesn't matter how you feel. You get whatever it is that needs to be done. And then you start to get rewards and positive feedback from that. And then you can take those same principles and apply it anywhere in life. Yeah.
Anything.
Yep. Anyway.
And you realize in sport, like, all these great players and great business people or great salespeople, speakers, like, you almost have this inclination to think they were just naturally gifted and they were great. But I know a lot of my friends now and people that I've played with that weren't all that good. And they went on to make careers for themselves and became great players. And of course, in our realm as well, great business people, great salespeople. And I think there is this illusion that, that they're just different.
So I did a guest spot on a podcast maybe a week ago.
Yeah.
So it's a triathlon podcast. It's it's hosted by a guy who was a world champion athlete, and then just another couple of dudes as well. So we're on there and we're having a chat, and we start talking about natural talent versus hard work. And my opinion is, so there's this guy Jan Frodeno who's the GOAT of triathlon. Like, he's unbelievable. And my hypothesis was, or what I put forward was, if you look at what he has done, and I mean, not last week, not last month, not last year. I mean, if you look at the body of work over 20, 25 years, and you take any person and you get them to put in the same level of commitment, discipline, and it's like the 1%ers when no one's seeing. If you get anyone and you get them to do exactly the same actions, I'm not saying that person will become, you know, the GOAT of triathlon, although they may very well do. I do agree there's a bit of natural talent.
Yes.
But what I am suggesting is that person will become elite, and elite to the point where if you are not part of the sport, it would be unrecognizable, the difference between the two. And that's my thing on hard work. And I believe that because I don't believe that I'm naturally talented at almost anything. It's quite frustrating. I have to work hard at everything I do. But I get there because I don't stop. It's like an illness.
I think that's a perception in your head, man.
Yeah, well, that's what this world champion on the podcast said. He said, "Look, Leigh, that's all well and good, and I really like how you describe it. It's very, very convincing."
Just call him bullshit in a respectful way.
But he goes, "Look, the issue I've got with what you've said is your sample size is 1 and the sample is you." Yeah. Just like completely shut me down. And then, you know, then just went on to say that he's coached hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes, and he basically said, for the poor people listening to it, he's like, "And look, I'm telling you, some people just don't have it."
Yeah. But I think that's a sobering thought as well, because they don't have it in this, but they might have it in something else.
Yeah.
And that's the sobering thought. I think genetics plays a huge part, especially in sports.
Yeah.
Especially in sports.
Yep.
But it doesn't discount the fact that, like you've said, you've had to work hard at everything. But to me, that almost gives the impression that you shouldn't have to.
What do you mean?
Well, you said you've had to work hard to get good at anything in life, right? You haven't been naturally gifted at anything, but that tells me you've got this almost thought that what you shouldn't have to get good.
No, I get what you're saying. So it's like almost like, oh God, mumble, why don't you?
That's right.
I'm not saying that you shouldn't have to, but I am saying I've had a number of people go, "Oh, you're so amazing at whatever."
Yeah.
Like sport. I mean, sport was a good one because it's very black and white. I'm like, you have no idea the sacrifice I put in. Like from when I was low 30s through till I was 40, I lived my life starving. I was starving the whole time. I mean, I ate, but to say I had disordered eating it'd be an understatement. I was forever tired. I lost almost all of my testosterone through. I mean, that's sport.
Yeah.
That's that type of sport. Anyway, and I sacrificed everything. I sacrificed my relationships. I sacrificed a lot of really good money making years, all to follow a dream. And at the end of it, I would look like I'm naturally talented, but what you don't understand is sport is 99% being starving and having no relationships. Yeah. And it's 1% people coming up to you and going, "Oh my God, you're so amazing. How did you do that?" And I did it for that 1%. The sacrifice was worth it.
It's worth it. I was going to say that you regret it, but obviously not.
No, I loved it. I chased a dream.
Yeah.
And I chased a dream, and a dream that I thought was dead. And it was worth it. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it. But it got to a point where it wasn't worth it anymore.
But I think it's interesting you mentioned about let's just call it the reps, like that structure, that 20 years of the GOAT of triathlon's structure and reps. And I think I do believe it, but I think there's more pieces to the puzzle. Our old CEO and mentor John Fitzgerald would always say success is repetition. Success is repetition. Basically, get the reps in. If you do enough reps, you'll get good at anything. I agree with it a lot, but also disagree with certain aspects of it, right? Because think of driving, like these cars going by, you drive every day. Now, if it was simply a case of putting the reps in, everyone that's driven for 20, 25 years could be a race car driver. If it was merely just about putting the hours in, right? I think the next piece, and I think why, I don't know if you realize this is why you've gotten so good at what you do, but I thought about it years ago, and it came to me recently. You're a very deep thinker. You observe things very well. You analyze things a lot. Even whenever we spoke, I was in Sydney at the time, you were in Melbourne, you'd fly up and I would ask you questions, and I could tell when you ask someone, I guess, a detailed question, they've got a lot of depth to the answer. You can clearly tell that they think very clearly or they break everything down. And I think to me, to get good at anything, yes, you've got to do the reps, but you've also got to be willing to take a step back and analyze, review, and be able to build upon that. I think that's the missing piece. I don't think a lot of people think deeply enough and analyze what they're doing and observe who they are and what they do to be able to take the next step, if that makes sense.
We spoke about this on that triathlon podcast as well. So I've been privileged to hang around a lot of really successful people. So celebrities, millionaires, billionaires, definitely sports people. And, pardon me, there is one common theme amongst them all. And that one common theme is an obsession, right? So it's almost to the point of an illness where something gets on the hamster wheel and it just clicks around and it won't get off until that mental scratch is itched. And, for me, I got that itch with triathlon, and 10 years I couldn't get that thing out of my mind. It was all I thought about. I wake up, my mind does not stop. So I get up and my head goes, "Ha, you're awake. I've been waiting for you." And then it just starts. I've got this internal monologue that just will not shut up. It just won't. I've tried. I meditate every day. It calms it down, but the voice doesn't stop. And what we were talking about on this podcast. So that obsession is what leads me to be non-stop with things like triathlon. And what the guys were saying on the podcast, which I thought was an interesting point, because I was talking about that mental obsession, and I said, I see it. I see it in all the successful people. It's obsession near on the point of illness. And what they said, which I thought was a super interesting point, they said, that's a natural gift. And I said, ask any of my ex-girlfriends, and they will tell you it's not.
It's definitely a blessing, but it's also a curse if you don't use it right.
It's exhausting. It's exhausting. I didn't realize this, but I was reading something the other day, and then I went out and did a survey of just the people around me, and 40 to 50% of people don't have that voice in their head. Do you have a voice in your head?
Yeah.
All the time?
Constantly.
Yeah. 40 to 50% of people don't. Like, they think from time to time, but this thing that won't shut up, the internal monologue that's non-stop, apparently 40 to 50% of people don't have it. If you listen to this podcast and you don't have that voice, please message in. I want to talk to you.
No. I struggled with it for years. Like, I struggled with it for years to the point where, like, part of working at Colossi, it's compulsory that you see a psychologist every week.
Really?
Every week.
Why?
So Michael Colossi is of the opinion that your business performance isn't hampered by business issues. It's personal issues.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. Can accept a bit of that for sure.
Well, I guess the premise is that's the foundation of everything, your personal life, right?
Agreed.
And if that isn't right, it doesn't matter what you do to fix your business. So he says the fundamental, and yes, I guess that's just how he approaches it. But of course, we talk about everything and anything. Similar to this podcast, we go and sit down with her, and it might just be a cuddle, it might be a kick up the ass, just to chat. But it's part of his way of operating a successful business. It's just sitting down with her, and she's less of a psychologist, more of a performance coach, mentor. But it's something that I find very helpful. It's definitely had a profound effect on my life. But I guess the point of what I was saying with that was, for years, I may have come across confident, may have come across, whatever. Like obviously speaking in front of people and giving speeches and as we did before, and selling in boardrooms. But I would almost say I was crippled with social anxiety.
Oh, I get that.
In the very moment, to the point where those voices, like, I'd walk into a boardroom and give a presentation, and I was walking in thinking everyone's looking at me, staring at me, thinking about me, looking at the way I walk, looking at my hands, looking at the way I set my laptop on the table, and I'm like, this voice, I'm like, this is mental. Like, I'm not even here. Like, I'm not inside my own head. I'm just in this external world. I would walk down to the cafe with my family, and I'm almost feeling like I'm the main character in everyone's life. And I can't be present in my own body.
Yeah.
And it was a strange thing, but
little do you know, they're not thinking about you because they're too busy thinking about themselves.
So I sat there with Aneta.
That's the psychologist.
That's her name, yeah, Aneta.
Yeah.
And I spoke to her and I told her this, and she's like, do you know what? Like, this isn't going to sound like something a psychologist should say, but in large part, nobody really cares about you.
Yeah.
There's an exceptional few people, obviously family, friends, but even they are living in their own head.
Yep.
Worrying about their mortgage, worrying about their rent, worrying about their house, worrying about their family relationships. Everyone's in their own head.
Yeah.
They're not looking at you. They might see you briefly, but as soon as they see you, they go back to their own problems and their own life and their own goals.
Like a cloud in the sky.
And I sat there and I was like, are you serious? Like, is this, I know this sounds good, but is this real?
What do you mean no one's thinking about me?
Is this real? And I was like, are you serious? And it was like a moment where I just sat there with clarity. I was like, you're right. It finally dawned on me that nobody's thinking about me, really. And I walked out of the office. She's got a wee study in the office, and I swear to God, I wasn't even walking. I was just floating into my office. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free to live life on my terms and what's important to me, and not what's important to what I think other people think of me. And I was almost a slave to that person.
Yeah.
Whoever that person was.
Yeah.
And that changed my life completely, that I was free to do what I wanted and
to be true to yourself.
To be myself.
Yeah.
For the first time in a long time. So that was an interesting thought that I think growing up in Belfast, and back to the story of coming to Australia, growing up, I always thought, because we didn't have a lot, and I always felt that, you know what, we're things are tough, and I felt that if you make a bit of money and you have a nice car and you have a nice house and a nice watch, you'd be happy. And I think the lesson learned is going through some path of success in a way. I realize it makes you happy in the moment, but those moments are fleeting.
Yeah.
And I think it's always nice, and it's nice to have nice things, but I think I've almost got to accept that happiness comes from inside, or feeling of fulfillment comes from the inside, and that journey of being in the external world and the mercy of everyone else, accepting that, you know what, that's not going to make me happy, and it made me suffer, sort of forced me over the last few years to start looking inwards. And like you said, whenever you look inwards, then you really see who you are. You either like the person or you don't. And at least then you can start living life on your terms and start making real changes. And that sort of found has been very helpful over the last few years.
I can relate to what you're saying too a lot. So, like, I own a business. You know, I've got staff. I'm a podcast host. I give speeches every week down at a local club. You know, I talk to a lot of people, and most people to meet me, they say that I'm confident, and I'm like, little do you know that there's this thing inside me. I'm not confident. I actually don't enjoy social situations. I have to force myself to go to them, and quite often what I say to myself, and I do it like before client meetings, I do it before speeches. We did it just before we started this podcast, where we had just a moment of quiet meditation. And what I do in that meditation is I just say, this isn't about me. Please let me be a conduit to whoever's out there, that they can get what they need from it. And let me help me focus on them, not me, because it's not about me. And that gets me through.
That's beautiful, mate.
Yeah. The other thing as well, nothing's ever enough. I related to that too. You know, I had a triathlon race where I won the national championships. It was a whole big thing. I went through an emotional journey in the race, blah, blah, blah. I won't bore you with the details, but I won this race, and there was like maybe a minute and a half or something like that where I knew I was going to win it. No one could catch me. Like I could really, I could soak it all in. You know, I went across the line and I took the tape and I'm screaming, and then my mate came second, and like, you know, we're hugging, and it was awesome. And then like it wouldn't have been 5 minutes afterwards, and this little voice inside of me went, this isn't enough. and what I've discovered, and it's taken me a lot of years to discover this, because I'm the sort of person who has to achieve things, right?
Yeah.
I see something, I go and get it, and it's not enough. And then I see something else, I go and get it, it's not enough. And it's taken me years to realize that nothing will ever be enough.
No.
But what I do like is I like chasing. But what I stopped doing was particularly with triathlon, everything I was sacrificing now for a future that never existed. So in triathlon, I'm sacrificing my happiness now because when I go pro, I'll be happy. That wasn't enough. When I make a podium, I'll be happy. That wasn't enough. When I win a race, that'll be enough. When I'm accepted by the other pros, that'll be enough. Nothing was ever enough. But the issue was I was sacrificing my happiness at the time for this thing that didn't exist in the future. And the shift that I've tried to make is that I need to enjoy the chase of it. And then the chase of it's part of it. And, you know, some parts of the chase are the grind. Sometimes it's just rocking up. And then other times it's super fun and you're laughing and carrying on. But if you're not enjoying that journey, maybe you're just in the wrong race. Maybe you're going after the wrong thing. Or maybe, and for me, this is quite often it, you just got to shift how you're looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, to your point, people think happiness, and I felt happiness was in the achieving of the goal, getting to the finish line, getting to the podium, getting to the new car, the new house, the new watch, whatever. But just reflecting on that, and like we say, you do the reps and then you go, well, that's not really working. Like, what is this? And you start thinking about it. And I think the whole premise of happiness is positive reinforcement, right? So like, it's basically feedback that you're, like you said, you're in the right race, right?
You mean like little wins?
Well, I think it's just progress, right? So I think it's when you look back on things, I think you realized that you were at your happiest when you were actually striving towards something that was better, you were growing, right? And I think whether it's something that's innately built within us to, like, happiness equals progress, or progress equals happiness, should I say? And I think that is the fundamental aspect of it. It's not, I heard Alan Watts say, like, people think life is to get somewhere, but he said, instead of treating life like a race, treat it like a dance. And the whole premise of this song is to dance. It's not about getting to the end of the song. And I think it's the journey more so than it is any destination. And it's interesting speaking. I was listening to Jordan Peterson recently, and he talks about first of all, you need to have a goal, because without a goal, you've got no direction. And without any direction, you don't have any positive feedback as to you're going from this position to that position. And that actual journey of going in an upwards direction towards whatever it is you may feel, that's the very thing that gives you the dopamine, the serotonin, whatever it is, the positive. But he says, even better than that, you need to have something you're running away from.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Like if I, for example, and I think this is also relevant in our business, because I think I've been guilty of this, which is I'm not going to make a decision, right? I'm not going to make a decision. I'm not going to buy that house. I'm not going to do this. But there's a severe cost of inaction. Yeah. Right? So why don't we just play out what happens if you don't do this?
Yeah.
What does your life look like in 2 years if you don't change that job, if you don't buy that house, if you don't do this? Just play that out. And I think sometimes, I mean, you talk about pain and pleasure. I would say pain is a far bigger motivator than pleasure. Right?
I agree with you that, yeah, people run from pain faster than they run towards pleasure.
And
definitely.
And hence there needs to be, right, okay, something I'm running to. But if I, like you said, if I'm 31 and keep acting like a dickhead, where am I at 34? Where am I at 35? Life's going to be harder. So he spoke about that. But then what was more interesting to that was he said, if you don't have a goal, you don't have any positive feedback. There's no happiness. That life of just,
because you're not getting anywhere.
You don't know where you're going. You might be getting somewhere, but you've got no calibration, right?
Yeah.
So you're not sure. Is it going in the right direction? Am I not, right?
Because you can't see the progress, because you're progressing towards nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when I think we all sit here and go, yeah, we've got goals. We look at them every day. We've got a checklist on the mirror. But there's certain aspects of life where you're not as clear.
I think a lot of people don't have goals.
Yeah.
Like, I know you're the sort of person who has. I think the majority of people don't.
Yeah. And I think, not sitting here as if we're gurus, but I think it's always,
we're not gurus.
Yeah.
I'm just working this out as I go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's half the battle, man. Take the step, right? But to that point, and this is where I've lived for years, is without any goal, there's no positive feedback, but more importantly, there's confusion, right? And if you're living in a state of confusion, that creates anxiety and dread, right?
Yeah. So anxiety is the unknown. Yeah.
You've no barometer on where your life's going. So therefore, because there's no negative pressure to motivate you to do something, and there's no positive goal to work towards, you're just sort of sitting there in the abyss.
So we have this situation pop up with first home buyers all the time. So with buying your first home, a very small percentage of it is about the house. So a lot of people, they're just like, hey, we've got houses. I'm like, if you're doing that, I don't think you understand what first home buyers' real problem is. And the real problem is they're terrified, right? Biggest purchase they've ever made. More zeros than they've ever seen in their life. And there's definitely a motivation to get in there. And for most of our clients, they want to provide for their family.
Yeah.
But I see people's emotions override it. And we try and do this exercise with people where we're like, okay, let's say you don't do it. Let's say you don't do it put it off. You put it off for 5 years. Where are you then? And then, they're still in a rental, blah, blah, blah. But the other thing they don't realize is the house they wanted to buy, rather than being 700 grand, it's now 1.1 million. And it's different when people are so caught up in the fear. it's hard to get the logic across of, hey, if you wait, there's only one of two outcomes, right? Number one is you will buy a block of land which is smaller, which is further away, and which is going to cost you more. That's the best thing that can happen. By you waiting, that is your best outcome. Or what happens for a lot of people is they just get priced out of the market completely.
Yeah.
I hear you, mate.
Yeah, that's it. I wasn't even thinking about relating to that, but yeah, it's consistent across the board. And I was thinking, I read this book. It was John recommended it to me years ago. I'm our old CEO, and it's something that changed my life in terms of time, because there's a certain triviality of time. Like speaking about, he had a good month, he's had a good year, she's had a good year. What does that even mean? Like you can sort of get your head around it, but if you say I've had a great month of training or a great month of business, like it's almost abstract, right? And I think what I've come to terms with is, you said you're sacrificing your day for this future that doesn't exist, right? And I think human minds are brilliant because we can think about the past, we can think about the future, and we can create all these stories about why we are in the position, why we're in the position we're in, and where we're going. But I think much of it, we spend too much time in the past and the future, far too much time, in my opinion. And I think that moment of clarity that you had, that might have been a present moment, the moment where I think some of the beautiful moments in your life, whether it's spending time with family, friends, your children, are the moments you're really present. And I think we need to spend more time there. So to that point, I've realized that the only thing you can control is today. Like ultimately, yes, you can plan for the week, you can plan for a month, you can plan for a year, but any good plan will be broken down to things you do.
Yeah, just do the next right thing.
Exactly. And more important than that, if it connects to that monthly goal, if it connects to that yearly goal, then that's the positive feedback. But on that, working within Colossi, what I've realized, what makes a high performance team is a team of collaborators, a team of great people that are willing to share knowledge with other people. And also, you could spend, like these for your clients and looking to buy their first home, the reality is they could spend the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years trying to learn what you've learned in your time. Try and figure out, make the mistakes, and then finally be in the position where they know as much as you to try and make an informed decision. But the problem is it's too late. And I read this snippet in a book, and it was time teaches all things to those who live forever. Now experience teaches thoroughly, but its course of action devours men's years. Therefore, most wisdom is wasted on dead men. And when you think about that, it's like, why would I waste 20 years of my life figuring it out that I'm 50? And it's too late to apply it. So that being said, people in our business, in your business, are extremely important because it saves people the time making the mistakes. Why make the mistakes that other people have made? Just learn from them.
You can only be an expert in so many things, right? And if you want to be an expert, I gave a speech on this, that balance is a recipe for mediocrity. Right? You can be balanced, but you'll be just okay at everything. Or if you want to be elite at something, you got to sacrifice. Because if we've only got 100 points of energy to give, and you put 90 of them into one thing, well, everything else has only got 10 left over. Yeah. So you can only be an expert in so many things. And a lot of the expertise, there's so much that can only come from time, right? So it's one thing to read a book about something. It's another thing to go out and experience it. And I think about this in relation to education quite a bit, in that we clearly need educators, but the failing of a lot of the educators is they have no real world experience. And real world experience counts. It counts for a lot, but it takes time.
It does. So how I came to Australia.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, mate. We'll look back, right? That's right. So no, speaking of sport, speaking of keeping myself out of trouble, I played soccer, football. It's the ball you kick with your foot that you call soccer in Australia. Interestingly, the only one you don't. I played soccer my whole life. And at the age of, I was getting alright. I wasn't that good growing up, but sort of like anything, you sort of work at something, you get a lot better. And I was at sort of 16, 17, whether it was delusional that I wanted to become a professional footballer.
Yeah.
At the age of 17, I broke my leg playing. And I was out for 11, 12 months, and I was over on trials in England at the time, and that obviously stopped everything.
Yeah, right.
So I had a lot of time to reflect, and in that time I had my 18th birthday. I was sort of playing local football, and I decided to get a job, and had a few friends at the time were working in a direct marketing company, which is a fancy name for those people at student shopping centres that try to sell products.
Yeah. What were you selling?
Energy. So it was a company called Electricity. It was essentially an energy provider. At the time, there was a monopoly in Northern Ireland, so it was just Power NI. So we were just the disruptor that came in. So now you had a choice.
Yeah.
So that was my pitch, and my pitch was essentially, this is a bill, that's a bill. We guarantee to be 14% cheaper. Electric's electric, regardless of who you use.
Yeah.
But then it was talking about the benefits of that 14%, how much that 14% was, and if I gave you that difference, what would you spend it on? And then taking it up anyway. Learning the trade. Before all that, I realized that I was terrible at it initially, and this is an important conversation, right? Because it's not all sunshine and rainbows, as we discussed. So I was 18, standing in a shopping centre, and think of just my mindset. Like 2 years ago, I was thinking about me playing in front of 20,000, 30,000 people as a child. You want to be a professional footballer. Now I'm standing in a cold, miserable Bunnings at 8 o'clock at night trying to sell energy to someone who doesn't want to talk to me, getting told to F off 10 times a day. And it was commission only.
Yeah.
So as an 18-year-old living from home, I had a bit of a buffer, obviously, being at home, but it still didn't keep my parents from being concerned about the lack of money I was earning. So after a few months, my dad sort of sat me down, and he was like, "Listen, I appreciate the fact that you're working hard, but you need to get serious about this. I don't know what you're earning. I'm probably earning £50 a week, like at the time, which, I mean, the average income's probably 10 times that, whatever, 6 to 10 times that." And he's like, "Listen, before you give up," he imparted a lot of wisdom, which I didn't realize at the time, but he was like, "Well, you're clearly not good at it." Right? You're clearly not. But surely there's someone else in the office that's doing better than you.
Yeah.
Like, surely there's people that are doing well. I was like, yeah, there's a lot of people earning £500 a week, 10 times what I'm earning. He's like, "Well, why don't you just ask, can you go with them and find out what they do?" I was like, "Well, that sounds too good to be true." Right? He's like, "Well, just try, just see what they're doing." So I asked the boss, I was like, "Can I go and shadow this person for a week?" And just because there was two of us on the stand at any given time. So the first day I spent with this person that was like the highest earner. Within about 20 minutes, I realized that what he was doing and what I was doing were two very different things, which was a blessing, because I was like, right, there's something here, right? It'd be a shame if I was doing exactly what he was doing, right?
Yeah.
So long story short, I spent three to 6 months just learning, right? Okay, well, I'm doing this, they're doing that. I'm going to start copying and practicing, getting the reps in, observing it. And within my second year, we had an award, and there was about 50 salespeople in the office. And the award was the top commission earner of the year got an all expenses paid trip to Australia.
Yeah, right.
And I won.
Did you?
That in the second year.
Yeah, okay.
At 19 years of age.
Yeah.
So I won that, earned the most. And I think more so, like, it's just interesting how the highs and the lows, like, yes, it was nice to get that award to come to Australia, but just realizing, like, hold on a second, this shouldn't be me. Like, I remember the feeling of feeling like a loser, feeling like an idiot, feeling like an 18-year-old when all my friends are going out and doing things and going on holiday. I was like, I can't afford to even I can't afford this. I'm like feeling ashamed of myself that, like, my friends were on holiday and I was at home standing in a shopping center feeling like a loser at 18.
Yep.
I'm like, this is not right. And then just going, right, okay, well, there's something you can do about this, working on it, building, and then realizing that in my second year, I beat 49 other people. to win that. So that to me was my first glimpse of actually there's something like it was the first moment I'm really like, you know what, I'm proud of myself that I climbed out of this.
Yeah, well, it's this thing. If you want to get what I've got, you've got to do what I do, and you can apply that to anything. So if someone is where you want to be, I mean, first of all, actually have a look under the hood and see if that's really where you want to be.
Yeah.
Because often there's a sacrifice there that you don't really want to make. But if you discover it is what you want, emulate them. Do the same things they're doing, and you will get something that approximates what they have.
Yeah. And I think that's it as well. You look back to our industry. I think too many people get their opinions on or their advice on property off of Uber drivers and taxi drivers, right? And I think it's
Bob at the barbecue.
Well, that's the reality.
What does
right?
Bob know?
And I think that's there's an element of that. Like before you take advice from someone, you think you need to make sure they're qualified, right? So, and obviously personal experience, their work experience, what they've done, and I think that's something you need to have a conversation with prior to taking advice from anyone. Because even in our business, I think we're less about being real estate agents. In the way we position ourselves is we're more just strategic advisors. We sit down and look at the situation, looking at where you want to go and what problems you're trying to solve by moving, and having a real conversation about what that looks like.
Yep.
And it's more about having an open dialogue, and then based on what they're telling you, seeing if you can offer a solution. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's not going to work. And I think that's also important, that even with me, one of my the first properties I sold in the business came off the back of me telling a client in an open home that based on everything you've told me, I don't think this property is for you.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important way of approaching things, that in a world where people are dishonest and deceitful and short-sighted, I think people respect people that are very honest to the point that it may be perceived to negatively impact them in the short term. But I think ultimately the most important relationship you have in your life is the one you have with yourself. So therefore, speaking of blessing and curses, I've got a very active conscience.
Yep.
And I've got to think very carefully, because I can't do the wrong thing by people because it eats me alive. And not to be taken advantage of, but I think it's just important that regardless, there's more important things to me than money. And that's making sure that I'm respectful and honest, and I hold myself with integrity. That is number one. And as a result, I think just that side of our business, if you're honest, you do the right thing, and ultimately sometimes we're not a good fit for people, whether it's buyers or sellers, or in your case, clients that are looking to purchase their first home, and that may be offering them to an alternative company or an alternative option outside of your business. And I think if you carry yourself that way, the most important thing is you'll have a good night's sleep, and I think your business will grow because ethically you're in the right place.
Yeah. And you've got to decide what you do and what you don't do. So we do house and land packages for clients. We do house and land packages because that's where the most grants are available, and that's where it's the biggest problem, or one of the larger problems that clients have is they can't save up a $80,000-$100,000 deposit. But if you go into a house and land package, you don't have to.
Yeah.
So that's what we do, and that's our niche. And we have people come through who do have $100,000 and they want to buy an apartment in Fortitude Valley, and that's fine. It's not for us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people respect that, and ultimately, I think you talk about you're in the business of property, you're in the business of first home buyers, but ultimately you're in the business of people. Like that's the fundamental aspect of it all, and I think if you approach it that way, and how can I, regardless of what we do, how can I make sure I get a good outcome for these people I'm speaking to? I think if you just approach it that way, instead of within your own self-interests,
I couldn't agree more about this. So we spent 6 or 7 months, and I'd been in this industry for a little while, had the business for a little while, and I kind of threw everything out and went, no, we're going to start again here. And where we're going to begin is at who our customers are and what their real problems are. And we did research pieces, surveys, all of this stuff, so we could come up we've got it's called a value canvas. I've literally got a document called the value canvas, which describes exactly who our clients are. You know, most of them 27 to 45. Most of them are couples, although roughly 15% is a single tradie, interestingly enough. Most of them have either have kids or they're just about to have kids, like they're planning on having kids. And all of them have three central problems, and they're emotional problems in that, you know, they feel overwhelmed, buying a home seems impossible, they've got no security and stability for their family. And then they've got a whole heap of perceived obstacles. You know, the perceived obstacles: I can't get a loan, I've got bad credit, I can't save up enough deposit, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then we have, obviously, we've got our product offering, which is a solution to that. And our product offering isn't, here's a house. Our product offering is something called First Home Foundations, which is 5 principles, which we believe if you master them, you'll end up in a house. So, for example, the first one is affordability. So it's got to be the first thing that you do. What's realistic and what's going to be obtainable for us? A lot of first home buyers, their head's in the clouds. Like, can't afford a $2.4 million. You're not going to Koloshi for your first time. That's what I'm getting at. Right. So, you know, the first step is affordability. The next principle is preparation. The next one's network, and, you know, so on and so forth. And none of it is actually about the house. I mean, you do end up with the house. Oh, none of it. The last step's about the house. It's called style. And that's where we get into the nuts and bolts of, you know, high ceilings, 900 mil appliances, all of that stuff. And that stuff is important, but it's irrelevant if you don't get the first bit right.
Yes.
And the whole idea of the principles and the product offering, like the Finance Ready Plan, for example, is to help overcome these obstacles. So then we can get our clients to the motherland, which is, you know, the ultimate aim for our clients is they want to be building memories in a home that they and their family love. And that's what it's about. You know, none of that is, hey, here's a 400 square meter block.
Yeah.
And that was, it's now, I think it's 18 months ago I began that, but the first, you know, 6 or 7 months, and literally 6 or 7 months, was that research piece on our clients. And for me, that's something that I couldn't see anyone else in this industry was doing. No one was going client first. No one was dealing with the real underlying issue. And you know what? When you deal with that, that's what makes it fun. With people, like, I remember when I first knew it was working, this woman had seen some of our stuff online, and she came through and managed to get a hold of me. And she started quoting back one of my videos, which I didn't even realize that she'd watched. And she's like, you know what? You guys really get it. And it was just vindication for what we were doing.
Yeah. And I think to that point, you come across, if you just talk about the outcome without thinking about your clients, you can't come across ethically, because ultimately, like you said, all we're doing is offering a solution to a problem. And if you haven't got the decency to talk about a problem or a situation that they're in, then you're, regardless of, even if your solution just by accident fits their problem, you haven't done the right thing, or it wouldn't even be perceived that you're doing the right thing, because you haven't taken the time to understand them first.
Yeah, you've just lucked it in.
You lucked it in.
Yeah.
And I had a client whenever we were in our previous role, I had a client in Sydney. I'll not sort of go through the specifics of his actual company, but he was a foreign exchange student, Indian foreign exchange student, came to Australia. He spent 2 years stressed, anxious, concerned, because he didn't know what a tax file number was, didn't know what an ABN was, didn't know how to get a rent, didn't know about bonds, didn't know about jobs. He just struggled. There was no clarity or support 15, 20 years ago for an international student in Australia. And instead of what most people would do, which is just spend the rest of their life complaining about that moment in time that they came to Australia and had a shit experience because there was no support, what he decided to do was he wrote down every problem he faced as an international student in Australia over 2 years. And then what he decided to do on the next side of the page was elaborate on every solution to that problem, to those problems.
Yeah.
Right? Now, he has now created the largest international student sort of hub traineeship in the country.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the last time we spoke, it was valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah, great.
He's based in Sydney, and essentially what he offers is he offers a full one-stop shop for international students to come here. They'll offer them with support of getting a job, get a tax file number, flights, accommodation, everything. So all they've got to worry about is just getting here and studying. They'll take care of the rest or support them. And he said to me, people complicate business. People try and spin 10, 20 different plates. All that you have to do to have a business is offer a solution to a problem. If you don't know what the problem of your customers, or the problem the customers have, it is impossible to offer a solution that will work.
Mm-hmm.
So do the right thing by the people, find out what the problem that you're trying to solve is, and then focus all of your energy and attention to offering a great solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously there's more pieces to the pie, but that is the fundamental of a business.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot here where I say to the guys, be undeniable, right? People need to deal with you and everything else just falls to the wayside because you are so on top of what you're doing, the client, where you're just undeniable. No one can compete with it.
Yeah.
Interesting you went through the example of writing everything down on a bit of paper. So in my book, which I bring up every podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not actually trying to say...
I'll hopefully try and get a signed copy.
Yeah, we'll give you a copy.
Thanks, man.
Anyway, in the book, what I go through is one of the biggest barriers to entry not barriers to entry, one of the biggest problems first home buyers happens between their ears, right? And it's that they have these self-defeating thoughts, or even worse, they've got the people who they love and trust the most giving them the self-defeating thoughts. Oh, don't do that. Be careful about this. Whatever it is, but just the in your head. So in the book, I say, get a bit of paper, draw a line down the middle of the page, and on the right-hand side, write down all the self-defeating thoughts that you've got. Oh, nothing ever works out for us. This seems too good to be true. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, perfect. Now you've got that list. On the right-hand side, what I want you to do is I want you to have a think about what if everything just worked out? Like, what if it was all okay? What if you ended up with your house? What if your kids had what they wanted, blah, blah, blah. What if everything just worked out? Number one, would that be okay with you? And a lot of people are like, they're scared of their own success. Like, I know I've done that at times and the answers come back, no, it wouldn't be okay. Like, it's just come back with negativity. Like, Jesus, there's a problem here.
Yeah.
But once you've got yourself into that mental space of, would it be all right if it all worked out? Go back through that list, and for every negative, self-defeating thought that you've got, on the right-hand side next to it, I want you to write a positive thought that relates to it would work out. So instead of writing, nothing ever works out for me, you write, this will work out for me. And just go, bop, bop, and replace each one with a positive thought. And now what you've got is, because we've all got this demon inside our heads, like this imposter monster. But now what you have is a bit of paper which literally has the skills to overcome those thoughts so you can get out of your own way.
But I think we're naturally predisposed to that negative thinking, like call it the crocodile brain. I think it's a safety mechanism.
Sure.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's threat detection almost, like to almost predisposed to the negative. And I think unless you consciously make an effort, I think that's where you can fall into that, which is supposed to be a protection mechanism.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
Yep.
It's now, we now use it against ourselves, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it's important because, like you've said, I think a lot of people just don't realize what they're doing to themselves. And I've been guilty of that, where you go down this rabbit hole of negative thought, and you almost need to take a step back sometimes and assess what's real and what's not, because a lot of it's just
Rubbish.
rubbish.
It's just nattering in your mind, which is stopping you from doing the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you do what you've always done, you'll end up with what you've always got. Right? So there's a wall of fear that doesn't actually exist. Well, I mean, the fear exists, but the most of, fear, false evidence appearing real. Right? There's this barrier that you've got to get through. If you get through it, the world's your oyster, because you can do new things. You can get new outcomes for yourself.
It's interesting. I heard Jordan Peterson. It was one of his talks, and someone asked him a question. I'm probably going to butcher this, but it was, the depth of my consciousness causes me to suffer. Is it a blessing or a curse to feel everything so very deeply? Right? That was a question, and from someone in the audience. And the answer was, the only way out is through. You must drink the very thing that poisons you until it curdles the very world around you. And I was like, what? But to your point, I spent a lot of my life avoiding things out of fear. Like even whenever I was working, we were working a custodian that year. I got Employee of the Year, and I was in John's house, and there was, I don't know, say 100 people there or whatever, and I got awarded Employee of the Year. I got up there and everyone was clapping and well done, congratulations, and I wouldn't say I felt like a loser, but I felt almost like an imposter. Like, this should make me feel happy. This should make me feel like I've achieved something. But I was saying at the start, there's one thing feeling like a loser when there's evidence that you should feel like a loser. But it's another thing feeling like a loser when everything around you is okay, right? Things are good, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's avoidance, and like the only way out is through. I think, unfortunately, there comes a point where you've just got to address things, and whether that's looking yourself in the mirror and saying, what am I avoiding, or what am I doing, or what am I not doing? That's
what have I put in the fridge to deal with at a later time? That needs to be dealt with now. And that's what so I had a mentor who said to me once, he's like, Leigh, how free do you want to be? I'm like, I want to be free. And he's like, we'll go into the fridge. You got to get everything out, deal with it all. Yeah. And for us, and to bring this back to first home buyers, so often buying your first home has been pushed deep into the fridge because it's so hard to do. It's so emotionally confronting. You've got no idea where to start. Got to get that stuff out of the fridge.
It's hard. It's even good, for people that are listening as well, even just having just talking on a podcast as well. It's almost like a form of journaling as well. Like, I think about this in terms of, you speak to certain people that journal and think deeply about things, but I guess in life, and we've got certain conversations we have with clients, and we have certain conversations we have with friends and colleagues, but not often do you actually start, really thinking deeply about certain things. So it's good to do it sometimes.
Well, so I write a lot of things down, but conversations like this are similar in that it forces you to order and organize your thoughts. Because I've got all this, I've got thoughts flying everywhere in my head. But if I want to get them across to you in a coherent fashion, I need to order and organize it. And look, I find it therapeutic. I love doing these podcasts. I love having a chat with people.
Oh, that's brilliant.
All right, let's wrap this puppy up. So, given your experience in the real estate world, if you were to give one piece of advice to prospective first home buyers, what would it be?
You don't need to go alone. I think people have this sense of pride or ego that I'll figure it out myself. And what I've realized is, and I've been very fortunate in Colossia, in this business, to deal with some of the most successful people in Queensland, financially business successful people, even personally successful, but they've got a very low ego when it comes to getting advice and advisors and having experts in their corner. In fact, they almost think it's laughable. These are people that are sitting with hundreds of millions of dollars, whether it's in the bank, assets, whatever. And the idea of not having an advisor on your side to consult with is almost, it's laughable to them. They're like, if I need to speak about tax, I've got an accountant. If I need to speak about law, I've got my lawyer. If I need to speak about property, I've got my advisor. And it's very, to them, that's how they've built their life. Number one, because they're making better decisions because they've got someone who's got the experience. So they don't have to spend the years making the mistakes. They've got someone. But also it gives them time to continue their life without taking on an extra burden.
Yeah.
And that's, I would say, from my perspective, is don't feel like you should be ashamed of getting advice. Use it as a sense of empowering that you're using this to your advantage so you can still enjoy your family, you can still be present, you can still enjoy your job, but you're leaning into someone who's an expert to make your life better without the additional stress. That's what I've learned from being fortunate enough to spend time with these people.
I like it. I really like it. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
Colossia.com. We're based in Broadbeach. My name is Darryl Bright. And I'm also on the part of being a real estate agent. You've got to also be on the socials. So I'm on Instagram, which is Darryl Bright, and Facebook, simply Darryl Bright.
Yeah, some amazing houses on there. I quite enjoy following your Instagram.
Yeah, I need to take a step back sometimes. It's I'm very fortunate to be in the position I'm in, coming from where I've come from, and I definitely don't take it for granted.
Mate, I really appreciate you coming in. That advice at the end was unreal. That was I wasn't expecting that. It was really good. But I appreciate you taking time out of your day. Great to see you again, mate.
You're a good man. Thanks for having me, Leigh.